Good morning, happy Monday everyone. This is take 2. I just tried to do a live video and I think that I was upside down and around the wrong way. So yes, happy Monday. Today's topic is neighbours and fences. So this is the 4th of a short series that I was doing on the laws and regulations that are around to make sure that we can live in our communities fairly smoothly. So I covered off neighbours and trees, neighbours and noise, and neighbours and drainage, and today is neighbours and fencing. So if you don't know, my name is Jackie Broman and I'm the owner of TBA Law. I'm actually an accredited specialist in wills and estate planning, so if you go back through all the videos on Facebook, there are a lot on that topic. But I did do a short series on property law because we do a whole lot of property work here as well, including conveyancing. And as I said, this is the 4th video of a short series I was doing on neighbours. So, neighbours and fences. Now, just like the other areas, this is also a fairly regulated area. Despite most people being able to live side by side without any issues, fences are historically a big problem between neighbours, and so there's actually a whole special piece of legislation called the Fencing Act in Victoria for neighbours and their fences. So with a fence, the neighbours on either side of that fence share the responsibility of the fence equally, generally. That's the starting point. So when a fence is being built or needs to be repaired, the two neighbours need to agree on the style of the fence, what the cost is going to be, and the timing of doing the fence. Now this sounds easy, but as I said, there's been a lot of disputes about fences over the years, and that's why there's special legislation around fencing. So even I've had people who have had such a dispute with their neighbour that they've built their own fence back off the boundary on their side of the property because they wanted a certain fence and they didn't want to have to involve their neighbour in the process, or they wanted a bigger fence than the neighbour wanted. And I've also had people who have tried to have fences fixed or boundaries realigned, to have the fence put back on the proper boundary, and they either couldn't find the neighbour because they're an absent owner, or the neighbour never responds. So what do? Firstly, you need at least 2 quotes from a fencing contractor, preferably 3. So 3 quotes as to the type of fence and the cost and the likely time frame of being able to engage that person. So when you think about the style of fence, it has to be what is sufficient. Okay, so a sufficient fence. Now in semi-rural properties, a sufficient fence is a post and wire fence. Pretty straightforward. However, in some residential subdivisions, particularly newer ones, the subdivision will say what type of fence they have to have, whether it be colour bond fence of a particular height and colour, or whether it be a wooden style fence of a particular height. So you can't really move from those if you've got covenants on your land. However, when I come back to what is sufficient, so if you were again in one of those semi-rural properties where post and wire fence is sufficient and you wanted a colour bond fence all around your property, it's not reasonable for your neighbour to be forced to pay half of that when you're requiring something that's more than sufficient. So while the starting point is 50-50 on the costs of a fence, if you want something that is more expensive than is required, then you have to pay the difference in the increase in the cost. So you get the quotes, you have a chat to your neighbour. If it looks like it's already going to be fairly difficult with your neighbour, then you actually have to serve them with a fencing notice. Now, a fencing notice is a particular form, and you can find that form online at the Dispute Settlement Centre of Victoria. And you have to fill in that form, give the quotes as well with the form, and give the form to your neighbour so you can post it if they're an absent neighbour. You can pop it in their letterbox if you don't really want to speak to them, or you can go over and hand it to them. So they have the fencing notice, they have to reply within a certain period of time. If the fencing work is urgent because the fence has fallen over, this is the only time when you can go ahead and incur the costs and get it fixed yourself, and then serve an urgent fencing notice on your neighbour after the fact with the details of what happened and the cost. And so they will have to contribute to that later down the track. Now, the notice is sort of the line in the sand, so to speak. So once you serve the notice, they're on notice that the fence needs to be done, and here's the variation in the costs, and there's not much wiggle room there. If they don't respond or they refuse the quotes, they are entitled to get their own quote, and maybe that's fine, and then they can proceed from there. But they're not really entitled to negotiate either on the 50-50 if it's a sufficient fence. So what do you do if there's a dispute about the cost and style of fence and actually getting your neighbour to contribute? Well, if you've given the fencing notice, the next step, if you wanted to, was to try a dispute resolution through the Dispute Settlement Centre of Victoria. But you don't have to do that. You can go straight to the Magistrates Court. So you can get an order from the Magistrates Court for the payment of half of the fencing costs if you incurred it under an urgent one. If it's not an urgent fence, then you shouldn't go ahead with the fence and incur any costs until you have an order from the magistrate. The magistrate will give you an order that the neighbour has to pay a certain percentage, usually 50%, and will put the time frame as to when that fence is to be done. So that, I suppose, is in a nutshell about fencing. Now, in terms of trespass, because I did talk about that in relation to neighbours and trees, so if you're redoing the fence, you or any contractor can go on your neighbour's property, and it's not trespass so long as it's within reasonable times, and I assume a contractor would only really work in business hours anyway, and it's for the purpose of the fence, so they can't be wandering around on the property, but they can certainly be on that side of the fence to get it done. So there you go, in a nutshell, neighbours and fencing. So if you want to check out more about neighbours, whether it's fencing, drainage, trees, noise, any of the things that I've spoken about in this video or the last three, you can actually go to a website called the Law Handbook, and there's a whole lot extra information there. It's just text writing, so you can have a look at that. And as I said before, the Dispute Settlement Centre of Victoria is the place to go to get the fencing notice and any other details about fencing issues that you have. The Magistrates Court website also has some details there as well, but best starting point is with the fencing notice anyway. So these videos I do post to Facebook, so they will be saved onto the page. You can go back and have a look at any past videos that you need to. Please tag people's names in it if it's relevant for them and they're going through any issue and the video might be useful for them. Otherwise, I do these videos every Monday morning, or at least I try to. If I'm away or if it's public holiday, then you miss out. But every Monday here at 10 o'clock, we do publish what the topic will be on the weekend, so you can see what's coming up. But there you go, neighbours and fencing. I hope that's helpful, and I hope that you have a really great week. See you next Monday.